Picture this. It's 9 p.m. on a weeknight. Your phone has 3 unread group messages about plans you're probably not going to. The apartment is quiet, the lights are low, and you're doing nothing anyone would post about. Maybe you're rereading old notes. Maybe you're making coffee. Maybe you're just sitting there, letting your thoughts wander without needing to turn the moment into anything productive. Then, somewhere in the back of your mind, a familiar question appears. Is something wrong with me for actually liking this? Probably not. In fact, if you genuinely enjoy being alone, there may be something interesting about the way you think, process emotions, and make decisions. Not necessarily because solitude makes you smarter, it doesn't, but because some people use quiet differently. They don't just tolerate the absence of other people, they use that space to think, process, create, and understand themselves without an audience. And today, we're looking at 6 things these people tend to do when they're completely alone. The 6th one is especially interesting because most people don't even realize they're doing it until someone points it out. For a long time, choosing solitude could be easy to misunderstand. Quiet people were called shy, withdrawn, antisocial, maybe even unhappy. But psychology has painted a more complicated picture. Time alone isn't automatically a problem, and it isn't automatically a sign of health either. What matters is what happens inside that time. 2 people can spend the exact same Saturday alone. One feels restless and desperate for distraction. The other finishes the day feeling clearer, calmer, and strangely refreshed. The difference isn't simply whether you're alone, it's what you do with the space. So let's look at the 6 behaviors that reveal how you relate to your own mind. 1. You try to solve problems before asking everyone else. Something goes wrong. A lot of people immediately reach for their phone. They text a friend. They ask what they should do. They search for someone else's opinion before they've even figured out what they think. There's nothing wrong with that, but your first instinct might be different. You sit with the problem. You think through the possibilities. You let yourself experience the discomfort of not having an answer yet. Only after you've worked through it do you decide whether you actually need someone else's perspective. That's a form of self-directed problem solving. The important part isn't that you never ask for help, it's that you don't automatically outsource your thinking. Over time, that practice can build something valuable. Confidence in your own reasoning. You become more comfortable sitting with uncertainty. You learn that not every difficult decision needs an immediate outside opinion. And eventually, being alone with a problem stops feeling like being stuck. It starts feeling like having room to think. 2. You process your emotions before explaining them. There's a difference between shutting down and slowing down. Shutting down is avoidance. Slowing down is different. Something happens. It bothers you. And instead of immediately reacting, you become quiet for a while. Not because you don't care, because you want to understand what you actually feel before you explain it to someone else. Maybe you're not simply angry. Maybe you're disappointed. Maybe you're embarrassed, frustrated, and slightly relieved at the same time. Putting precise words to emotions is sometimes called affect labeling. Research has connected this kind of emotional identification with the ability to regulate emotions more effectively. And that matters because vague emotions are harder to work with. I feel terrible doesn't tell you much. I'm hurt because I expected more from that person gives your mind something specific to examine. You don't necessarily solve the emotion immediately. You simply stop running from it long enough to understand what it's trying to tell you. 3. You create your own ways to feel grounded. Maybe you have a specific walk you take when your head feels crowded. Maybe it's coffee in complete silence before you look at your phone. Maybe it's 15 minutes of journaling that nobody will ever read. None of these habits look impressive from the outside. That's exactly why they matter. You didn't necessarily build them because a productivity guru told you to. You discovered them because at some point you realized they helped. Over time, those small rituals can become a kind of personal structure. Instead of needing constant stimulation to feel okay, you've learned a few ways to reset yourself. Instead of waiting for someone else to create the right environment, you can create one for yourself. That's a quiet form of independence. And there's an important distinction here. Being independent doesn't mean refusing help.
It means knowing how to steady yourself without always needing the outside world to do it for you. 4. You make important decisions away from the crowd. You'll still ask questions. You'll still listen to people you trust. You might even change your mind because someone gives you a perspective you hadn't considered. But when the decision actually belongs to you, you tend to step away from the noise. The job offer, the move, the relationship, the decision to stay, the decision to leave. At some point, you need a quiet place where you can hear your own answer. That's harder than it sounds. When we're uncertain, other people's opinions can feel strangely comforting. If everyone around you chooses one direction, following them means you don't have to carry the full weight of the decision yourself. But other people's opinions are information. They're not instructions. Learning to make that distinction is a powerful skill. It means you can listen without automatically obeying. You can consider advice without surrendering your judgment. And when the consequences of a decision are yours to live with, you can make the final call yourself. 5. You actually enjoy your own company. This is where solitude starts to become something more than simply being comfortable alone. Imagine having an entire evening with nobody to talk to. No plans, no notifications, no background conversation. For some people, that silence feels like waiting. They're counting the minutes until someone texts. For you, it might feel completely different. The silence isn't empty, it's yours. You can read, walk, think, make something, listen to music, sit on the balcony, or do absolutely nothing for an hour without feeling like the time was wasted. That ability to experience yourself as good company is sometimes described as self-companionship. And it doesn't mean relationships don't matter. They do. Healthy relationships can give us connection, support, perspective, and belonging. But there's another kind of relationship that quietly shapes all of them. The relationship you have with yourself. When you aren't constantly trying to escape your own thoughts, solitude stops feeling like punishment. It becomes a place you can return to. 6. You examine yourself without anyone asking you to. This is the one most people miss. Late at night, maybe after a conversation that didn't feel quite right, you suddenly find yourself replaying it. Not obsessively, curiously. Why did I react like that? Why did that comment bother me so much? Was I actually angry or was I embarrassed? What was I trying to prove? Nobody told you to think about it. Nobody called you out. There's no consequence forcing you to examine yourself. You simply want to understand what happened inside your own head. That's spontaneous self-reflection, and it can become a powerful habit. Some people only examine their behavior after somebody else points it out. Others develop the habit of checking in with themselves before anyone else has to. They notice patterns. They question their reactions. They reconsider assumptions. Sometimes they even discover that the version of themselves they were defending wasn't the version they actually wanted to be. That's what makes this behavior different from simply enjoying solitude. The 5th behavior is about being comfortable with your own company. The 6th is about using that company to understand yourself. And over years, that difference can matter. Because self-awareness doesn't usually appear in one dramatic moment. It gets built through hundreds of small moments when you stop, look inward, and ask yourself an uncomfortable question. What all 6 behaviors have in common? None of these things look particularly impressive from the outside. Nobody gives you an award for sitting quietly with a difficult emotion. Nobody applauds because you solved a problem without texting 5 people first. Nobody sees the decision you made after spending an hour alone thinking it through. But stack those moments together over years, and something starts to change. You become less dependent on constant reassurance. You become more comfortable with uncertainty. You get better at separating your own values from everyone else's expectations. And slowly, you develop something that can't be built through appearances alone, a working relationship with your own mind. There's also an interesting neuroscience connection here. During periods of rest and internally focused thought, a network called the default mode network is often active. It's involved in processes such as autobiographical memory, imagining the future, and connecting information internally. In simple terms, your brain isn't necessarily doing nothing just because you're not talking to anyone. Sometimes the quiet is when your mind is sorting